On the night of May 13th, 2008, Brandon Swanson was just like thousands of other college students, celebrating the end of the school year. He was 19 years old and full of potential. He'd grown up in the quiet town of Marshall, Minnesota, and had just completed a year studying wind turbines at Minnesota West Community. That night, Brandon attended 2 parties with friends. People saw him drinking, but no one thought he was drunk or acting out of character. Around midnight, he said his goodbyes and got into his Chevy Lumina to drive home. Somewhere along the route, something went wrong. Just before 2 a.m., Brandon called his parents, Brian and Annette. He told them he had accidentally driven his car into a ditch on a gravel road and couldn't get it out. He sounded frustrated but not hurt. He asked if they could come pick him up. Brian and Annette jumped in their truck and headed out. Still on the phone with their son, Brandon described his surroundings, tried to guide them in, and even flashed his headlights to help them find him. But they saw nothing. He didn't see them either. It was as if he wasn't where he thought he was. After about 20 minutes, Brandon told his parents he was giving up on waiting. He said he could see lights in the distance. He thought it was Lind, a small town southwest of Marshall, and he was going to walk there. He told his father to meet him in a parking lot near a bar in town. They stayed on the phone while Brandon walked. For 47 minutes, Brandon talked with his father as he walked through the dark. He said he was crossing fences and could hear running water nearby. He sounded calm, not lost, not panicked. He seemed to know where he was going. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, Brandon shouted 2 words. "Oh shit." The line didn't go dead, but Brandon stopped responding. After a few moments of silence, Brian and Annette hung up, thinking maybe he had dropped the phone and would be able to find it more easily if it lit up again when they called back. They tried, over and over, but Brandon never picked up. At 6:30 a.m., they reported him missing. The police told him to wait. Young people go missing all the time, especially after a night of drinking. One officer even told them Brandon had the right to be missing, but his parents knew better. When the search finally began, police focused on Lind, because that's where Brandon had said he was headed, but there was no trace of him. Eventually, investigators pulled Brandon's cell phone records, and that's when everything took a turn. The call hadn't come from near Lind at all. It had been routed through a tower near the town of Taunton, northwest of Marshall, a full 25 miles from where his parents had been searching. That's when deputies found Brandon's car. It was exactly where the records said it should be, stuck on the edge of a gravel road. One side was hanging over an incline just enough that the tires couldn't grip the ground. But there was nothing around it. No tracks, no direction to follow. They brought in dogs. One team picked up a scent that led through fields, past fences, down dirt paths. It followed a route toward an abandoned farmhouse, and then along a river that lined up with what Brandon had said on the phone. He told his father he was walking near water, that he was climbing over fences, that he was heading toward lights in the distance. But then, the trail vanished, right at the edge of the river. Search teams feared the worst. They thought maybe Brandon had fallen in and drowned. Water levels had been high that night, up to 10 feet deep in some areas. The Minnesota Department deployed boats. Deputies scoured the riverbank. They even installed gates downstream to catch anything that might float by. Still, nothing. And strangely, the bloodhound that had followed Brandon's trail didn't stop at the river, crossed to the other side. The scent continued up the opposite bank, through more fields, and then ended at a gravel road. If Brandon had drowned, why would the scent have continued? Some people believe he may have fallen and injured himself. Maybe he was knocked unconscious. There was speculation online that a piece of farm equipment might have accidentally run over him later that morning, and that someone, perhaps the farmer, panicked and hid it. One other chilling detail is that dogs reportedly marked Brandon's scent on some farm equipment nearby, but no one has ever come forward, and no one has ever been arrested. In the months and years that followed, Brandon's parents refused to give up. They left their porch light on every night in case he came home. As a sign of hope, the search picked back up that fall after the crops were harvested, and again the following spring, then again after the snow melted. Every time the land changed, the search resumed. By 2011, search teams had covered more than 120 square miles. Some believe Brandon wandered off and started a new life, but his parents say no. He wouldn't just disappear without a word. Others believe he was murdered, that someone was out there that night and took advantage of a vulnerable young man walking alone in the dark. To this day, there's no evidence pointing clearly in any direction. Annette Swanson never forgot how the police treated her when she first reported her son missing. She was told he had the right to be missing, but she knew better, and she fought to make sure no other family had to hear those words. With her and Brian's help, Brandon's law was passed in Minnesota. It requires law enforcement to begin an investigation as soon as an adult is reported missing. On December 31st, 2000, in a quiet, residential neighborhood of Tokyo, something unimaginable had been discovered. At 10:40 a.m., Haruko, an elderly woman just trying to check in on her daughter's family, entered their home. There she found her daughter, Yasuko, her son-in-law Mikio, and their two young children, Nina and Rei, their lifeless bodies. Yasuko and Mikio had been stabbed. So had their daughter, 8-year-old Nina. The youngest child, 6-year-old Rei, had been strangled and killed by bare hands. Authorities from the Tokyo Police Department determined the murders had occurred sometime between 11:30 p.m. on December 30th and 12:05 a.m. on the 31st, just 35 minutes. But the killer didn't leave after that. Instead, he stayed in the house for hours. He ate ice cream. He drank barley tea and ate melon from the family's refrigerator. He even used their toilet and didn't flush. He sat at the family computer browsing the internet, and he treated the wounds he received during the attack using the family's first aid kits. He also took a nap on their couch. The home bordered Soshigaya Park, a quiet stretch of greenery behind their house. Investigators think the killer climbed a fence, got himself onto the air conditioning unit, and then entered through a second-floor bathroom window. The fly screen from that window was found on the ground outside, carefully cut. The murders began upstairs. 6-year-old Rei was strangled while sleeping in his room. Then, something alerted Mikio downstairs. According to one police theory, he rushed to investigate, confronting the killer and struggling with him before being stabbed in the head with a knife. That knife broke. The killer then moved on to Yasuko and Nina, attacking them with the broken blade before grabbing a santoku knife from the family's own kitchen to finish what he started. Drawers were ransacked and some cash was taken, but more money was left untouched. Some documents had been dumped into the bath and toilet, but it was far from the typical mess of a robbery. The killer left behind his clothes, a knife, and a bag, like he was leaving intentional clues. Although police found fingerprints and DNA throughout the house, none of them matched any existing criminal databases. They did, however, tell a strange story. The killer's blood, left behind from injuries sustained during the attack, was type A. It didn't match anyone in the family. DNA analysis showed that the killer was male, likely of mixed heritage. Maternal DNA from a person of European descent, possibly Southern European, and paternal DNA consistent with East Asian ancestry. He was estimated to be around 170 centimeters tall, thin, right-handed, and, based on physical clues at the scene, likely between the ages of 15 and 24 at the time. Inside the bag he left, police found traces of sand. That sand was analyzed and found to match two specific places: Edwards Air Force Base in California's Nevada desert and a skate park in Japan. But no one knows how these places connect. In total, the investigation into the Setagaya murders has become one of the largest in Japanese history. Over 246,000 investigators have worked the case. More than 12,000 pieces of evidence have been collected. And yet, there's been no arrest. To this day, police return to the site of the crime every year. A small statue was placed at the nearby Sengawa River, exactly 100 days after the murders, meant to protect children and travelers. No one knows who put it there. As of now, a 20 million yen reward remains for any information that could lead to an arrest. Derek and Maria Broaddus bought their dream home in 2014. The $1.3 million Dutch colonial house at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey, was a new beginning for them. Only a few blocks from Maria's childhood home, this house symbolized a return to roots, a chance to raise their 3 young kids in what Neighborhood Scout ranked as one of the top 100 safest towns in the US. Derek, a successful senior vice president at an insurance firm in Manhattan, had just turned 40 when they closed on the house. 3 days after closing, Derek was doing some light renovations and checked the mailbox. Inside was a white envelope with no return address. It was simply addressed to, quote, the new owner. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades, the letter read. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. The anonymous writer, who signed off as the watcher, claimed they had been assigned to keep a close eye on the house. And now, on the Broaddus family. The letter referenced the renovations, the layout of the home, and even the make and model of their car. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? He was talking about their children. The Broadduses immediately contacted the previous owners, John and Andrea, to ask if they'd ever received anything like this. Surprisingly, they had. Just before closing, they'd gotten a similar letter from the watcher. It struck them as weird, but they threw it away. Still, they went with Maria to the police, where a detective told her not to tell anyone, neighbors included. The police quickly turned their attention to Michael Langford, the adult son of a neighbor who lived right next door. Michael had lived there for decades and was described as a strange character by other residents. He denied knowing anything, and without concrete evidence, police had to let him go. A second letter soon arrived, 2 weeks later. This time, the details were even more alarming. The writer referenced the Broaddus children by name, described one of their daughters as a talented artist, and said they had seen her drawing in the enclosed porch. The watcher asked, have they found what is in the walls yet? Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? The Broadduses were already too afraid to move in. They launched their own investigation, hiring a private investigator to stake out the neighborhood. They also brought in a former FBI agent to conduct a threat assessment. The agent noted the letter's formal language, the use of double spaces after sentences, and the way the envelope was addressed suggested that the watcher could be older. The writing style was articulate but riddled with typos, suggesting someone unstable. Then came a third letter. Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you. The family, now too terrified to live there, had still not moved in. By December 2014, the police admitted they'd exhausted all leads. Just 2 months later, the Broadduses listed the home. At the same time, they secretly bought another home in town, under an LLC to keep it off the radar. 2 weeks later, a fourth and final letter arrived. You wonder who the watcher is? Turn around, idiots. Maybe a car accident. Maybe a fire. Bones break. You are despised by the house. And the watcher won. Experts still don't know who wrote the letters. Their literary tone paints a terrifying picture. Despite strong theories and forensic evidence, the case remains unsolved. The only DNA found, belonging to a woman, has never led to an arrest. Blair Adams was a 31-year-old Canadian man with a good job, supportive family, and no obvious reason to vanish from his life. But in the summer of 1996, he seemed convinced that someone was after him, and within a matter of days, he would end up dead in a strange place. In the weeks leading up to his death, Blair began acting erratically. He told his mother that people were spreading rumors about him, though he wouldn't say what they were. He confided in his friends that someone was trying to kill him. He even warned his girlfriend about people from his past, former colleagues who had recently returned from Germany. On July 5, 1996, Blair emptied out his safe deposit box, removing thousands of dollars in cash, along with gold, platinum, and valuable jewelry. He also withdrew most of the money in his bank account. Then, he attempted to flee the country. His first plan was to enter the US via a ferry, but that plan was quickly shut down by immigration officials. Carrying large sums of cash with no clear explanation, Blair raised suspicions. They flagged him as a possible drug courier, and once they discovered his prior convictions for drug possession and assault, they denied him entry. So, Blair returned home. He went to his job and abruptly quit. He picked up his last paycheck and disappeared again. By the early morning of July 9th, Blair was caught trying to cross the border on foot. Canadian Border Patrol stopped him at the border. He had fresh scratches on his hands and legs. There had been a recent car theft in the area. Blair matched the description of the suspect. The stolen vehicle had been found abandoned nearby, but Blair denied any involvement, and with no solid evidence, authorities let him go. Later that same day, he tried something different. He rented a Nissan Altima from Vancouver International Airport and drove it across the US border into Seattle. Once in the States, Blair made another unexpected move. At the Seattle airport, he bought a round-trip ticket to Frankfurt, Germany. He had once worked there on a project for his stepfather's construction company and had dated a woman in Frankfurt. But that woman later told police that she had no idea he was coming and that she hadn't heard from him at all. Whatever he was planning, it changed again. Blair canceled the flight and exchanged his round-trip ticket for a one-way to Washington, D.C. When asked why, he said the person he was going to see in Germany had gotten sick. He landed at the airport in the morning on July 10th. There, he rented another car, a Toyota Camry, and began heading southwest. At some point along Route 250 in Virginia, Blair backed into another vehicle. The accident was minor, and the driver later told investigators that Blair seemed nice, but was in a hurry. By that evening, Blair had traveled over 500 miles from D.C., ending up in East Knox County, Tennessee. At around 5:30 p.m., he showed up at a gas station. He told the clerk he couldn't get into his car because his key wasn't working. Interstate Repair Service sent Gerald Sapp to help. When he got there, it didn't take long to figure out the problem. Blair was trying to use the Nissan key from his previous rental. It didn't fit the Toyota he was now driving. I asked him to look in his pockets. Sapp later recalled. I said, "If you drove this thing up here, you gotta have another key in your pockets." And he wouldn't look. Sapp didn't think Blair was drunk or high, but something wasn't right. Still, he had Blair's car towed and gave him a lift to a nearby hotel. That's where Blair was caught on surveillance footage, wandering around the lobby for nearly 40 minutes. He seemed anxious. Eventually, he rented a room, paying with a $100 bill. But when the clerk tried to give him his change, Blair turned around and walked out. He never stepped foot in the room. The next morning, July 11th, construction workers at the nearby hotel found his body. It was around 7:30 a.m. when they spotted him in a parking lot behind the hotel that was still under construction. Blair was half naked. One of his shoes was under his head, like a pillow. Around his body was a scatter of currency, American, Canadian, and German bills, totaling nearly $4,000. His fanny pack was found nearby. Inside it were gold bars, jewelry, gold, and platinum coins. The previously missing key to his Toyota was also in the bag. Nothing appeared to be stolen. His passport, ID, and credit cards were all still there. An autopsy revealed that Blair had been beaten. He had abrasions and defensive wounds, indications that he tried to fight someone off. He had a head injury consistent with being struck by a crowbar or club, but the fatal blow was to his stomach. Something, likely a heavy object, had ruptured his abdominal wall. His body showed signs of SA, and in one of his hands was a single strand of long hair, his only potential clue to the identity of his killer. Police released a composite sketch based on two witnesses who saw Blair talking to a man outside a Cracker Barrel near the hotel the night before he died. But the man in the sketch was never identified, and more than 2 decades later, Knoxville police admitted they'd never received a single credible tip about who killed Blair Adams or why. On August 17, 1966, 2 Brazilian men boarded a bus in their small town. Their names were Manuel Pereira, age 32, and Miguel Jose, age 34. They were close friends, both electronic technicians and both married. They told people they were headed to Niterói, about 200 kilometers away, to pick up electronic components and scout out a used Volkswagen. Between the two of them, they carried roughly 2.3 million cruzeiros, a significant amount at the time. But when a family member asked why they didn't just buy the car locally, Miguel answered cryptically that wasn't the only reason for the trip. He'd explain more about it later, something about spiritualism, but they would never return. A friend named Helcio, who later became a brief suspect, said he escorted the two to the bus station that morning. Interestingly, he believed they were going to Sao Paulo, not Niterói. He said the two friends were very insistent that he not go all the way to the platform with them. That afternoon, around 2:30 p.m., they arrived in Niterói. The men visited a familiar electronics store. They'd been there before, but they didn't buy anything. Witnesses later said the two were also spotted at a clothing store, buying identical raincoats. Then around 4:35 p.m., they were seen at a bar. Miguel bought a bottle of mineral water with magnesium. According to the barmaid, he seemed unusually nervous, constantly checking his watch, like he was in a hurry to be somewhere. Still, he paid, took the bottle and the deposit receipt. By sunset, the two men were gone. According to Rolino de Matos, a local security guard, he saw them later that day at the base of a rugged hill on the outskirts of Niterói. He said they were dropped off in a jeep, driven by a blonde man, accompanied by one or two other unidentified men. Then, Manuel and Miguel started walking up the hill. The next morning, a boy named Paulo saw two bodies lying on the hillside, but when he told the police patrol, they ignored him. 2 days later, another boy named Jorge noticed a strange smell coming from the area. He went to investigate and found the same two bodies. This time, the police took it seriously. The men were identified by documents found on them. Both were lying on their backs, hands behind their necks, as if they had been relaxing. Their faces were turned toward the sky. They wore the same identical raincoats they had purchased, and they had been carefully placed on a bed of leaves. But the disturbing detail that made this case was that both of them had a lead mask over their face, like a thick, homemade visor, the kind you'd use to shield your eyes from intense light. The masks were clearly worn at the time of death, and right next to them, investigators found a collection of strange items. A bottle of the same mineral water they bought earlier, a package of 2 wet napkins, a handkerchief with the initials MAS, a pair of sunglasses with a ring wrapped around one arm, and a rectangular concrete block. There was no sign of struggle, and no clear cause of death. Also found nearby were 3 sheets of paper. One listed spare electronic parts and a math equation. The other read, Monday, 1 tablet in the morning on an empty stomach. Tuesday, 1 tablet after a meal. Wednesday, 1 tablet before going to bed. Then, the final note. At 16:30, be at the agreed place. At 18:30, swallow the capsule. After the effect, protect the metals and wait for the mask signal. Despite the best efforts of the police, the cause of death was never determined. The bodies were already decomposing by the time they were found, and toxicology couldn't be done. The local morgues were full, and no cold storage was available to preserve them for reanalysis. The final cause listed was cardiac arrest due to unknown causes. A second autopsy was done nearly a year later with the same result and no new information. No animals had touched the bodies, despite 3 full days and nights outdoors. Strange, given the area was full of rats and vultures. Investigators also confirmed that 5 days before their trip, the two had been seen hammering a lead pipe at home. They told neighbors they were making something to survive the end of the world, which, according to them, was going to happen in 1968 due to a cyclone. That same night, one of their wives saw them trying on the masks in front of the mirror. At Miguel's home, police found a book on spiritualism and science, with passages marked about bright lights, masks, and contact with spirit guides. The case was officially closed in 1969, listed as death by natural causes. Just 2 months earlier, the two men had invited friends to the beach at Atafona. According to multiple witnesses, including local fishermen, a blinding explosion shook that area. Glass shattered up to 15 kilometers away. People described a glowing object descending from the sky into the sea, then blasting back up in a flash of light. Even the Brazilian Navy and Air Force reportedly took interest. A day earlier, a strange radio transmission had been picked up from 3 call signs. One widely accepted theory is robbery. After all, the men were carrying a large sum of money, yet only a fraction of it was found. Witnesses saw them with strangers. The trip to a remote hill could have been a trap. Some say they were tricked into taking poison under the promise of witnessing a contact. One man even confessed from prison in 1969 that he and others killed the pair to steal 6 million cruzeiros. But his story was riddled with contradictions and ultimately dismissed as fiction. Others suggest a hallucinogenic ritual gone wrong, perhaps involving LSD or mescaline, popular among spiritualist groups at the time. And then there's the UFO theory. A woman and her children claim that on the night of the 17th, they saw a glowing, oval-shaped object hovering over the hill, flashing lights in every direction. That was it for the video. If you want to see more of my content, consider watching this video that YouTube thinks you will enjoy. Stay safe, and until next time.